Jacob and his brothers didn't go through it unscathed. Well, Jacob went through the captivity eventually, and he eventually became the second in command. He eventually brought his father down with Joseph and with his son, and they got through it. But in the meantime, they suffered. Eventually what happened? It led them to a captive state. That is what we're going to see in this nation. Whether we want to accept it or not, it's going to happen. Like in Egypt before Exodus, economic ruin. God will bring about economic ruin. We don't see it all yet. We're beginning to see glimpses of it here and there, and the news media is not covering it. They're putting it on the side and they're putting it on the back burner. Revelation 11:3 says, "And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These have the power to shut up heaven that it not rain. It falls in the days of their prophecy, and that they have power over the waters to turn them to blood, and strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire." So for 3.5 years, there's not going to be any rain. That means this entire world is going to be affected. Kings says this, 1 Kings 17. It's a type. And Elijah, the Tishbite, and the inhabitants of Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, except at my word." And we know for 3.5 years that he prophesied there was no rain. Jesus Christ says, when he talks to us in the New Testament, "Behold, says, I will send Elijah before my coming." And these two witnesses are a type of Elijah that is going to come in and do the exact same thing that Elijah did and called no rain down. And there was a severe famine, and economic hardship was driving. When these two witnesses are out there who are proclaiming God's holy word, they're going to be looking for those who back those people up, because they're going to blame us for the damage of what's going on. And we will know the truth. The economic ruin. The more cities today. Now, look, I don't know how many people understand this. There are more cities in the United States that faced bankruptcy in 2011. According to this report, this is through the Business Insider, there are at least 16 cities in the United States that will have to declare bankruptcy if they cannot find new revenues and not make the deep spending cuts. That means the benefits and those who work for that city and those states are going to have to cut back. That means adding to more unemployment, which falls into the government of the federal level to help support those people that they're cutting back on because of the default. It also means that there's many of these cities that are not going to be able to cut back enough. California may be one of those states. And so the government's going to have to step in and give them a handout to keep them going. And they don't have the money now. According to the Center of Budget Priorities out of Washington, it says that 46 states face huge budget shortfalls for 2011, and many of those have not paid their debts yet of 2010. Now this is happening. Remember the 7 years of lean? Gradually sucking all the reserves out? Several states also face the same fate. Additional millions of Americans have filed on high bankruptcies or are being forced to rely on government for aid. Now this is according to this Washington think tank on the budget priorities in America. The U.S. continues to mount its debt, economic ruin. The U.S. is running in vast annual budget deficits that by some methods of calculation may be as high $5 trillion a year. Now that's unthinkable. That's not real. And they say, oh no, the budget deficit is only 1.3. I think they moved it to 1.4 just the other day, $1.4 trillion. But if you accept all the other debt that they're assuming, that they say they're going to guarantee, they're saying that the acceptance of that debt could be as high as $5 trillion a year right now. The official gross U.S. debt has reached roughly $3.6 trillion. Now, this was just a couple months ago. It's actually higher than that right now. It's getting closer to 14 trillion because, see, they got a ceiling, and they're going to have to meet to raise that ceiling. But when one adds up the unfunded liabilities of Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and all the other liabilities such as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the total may be somewhere around $59 trillion that the United States actually has in debt it needs to pay. There's no way this country can pay that back. Those are not the funny figures, those are real figures. And some unofficial reports or official reports claim it could be as high as $200 trillion when you put it all together. And it's so big and there's so much out there, they really can't get a good grasp on it. minimum that they know of is somewhere around $59 trillion that they have accepted liability for. When all these debts that took place in the last 3 years, they just all went away, where do you think they went to? The federal government absorbed them in the U.S. Treasury. The rest of the world understands that's what's going on. We reported in the last quarterly on page 11. I'm going to bring this out in just a second to show you what we reported. Timothy Geithner wrote the following. I saw this. It was a little hard to read, so I put it on a separate page coming up. On October 18, 2010, less than a month ago, Timothy Geithner openly stated that the feds would not do what they just did. It's amazing. When do you know the government's going to do something? Right after they deny they're going to do it. You can normally say, right after they go public and say, we're not going to do that, they're about to do that. Why? Because they have to stop the panic until they have everything in place, and then they do what they need to do. If you knew tomorrow that the banks are going to be beginning to default by Monday evening, all right, so Monday evening the bank's in the default, Monday morning you're going to be in that bank getting your money out. Right? So what do they have to do is say, oh, we're just fine. When a company gets bought out by another company, they will call all the employees together, because I've been through this twice. They call everybody together, and what is the first thing to do? Everybody's going to have a job, don't worry. A month later, 2 months later, when they come in, the new company takes over, and there's the pink slips going out. Because they need you during the transition. It's not about you. It's about keeping them going, and that's what the government does. All right. He went on to say this. This is quoted from that interview. It's not going to happen in this country. Remember that? Can't happen here. We're talking about the devaluation of the dollar. All right. So he said this to a group of business leaders in the Silicon Valley. He went on to say that it's important for people to understand that the United States of America and no country around the world can devalue its way to prosperity, to be competitive. Geithner went on to add, it is not a viable, feasible strategy, and we will not engage in it. He said that in October. He asked if the dollar would lose its status as the world's reserve currency. The Treasury chief said, not in our lifetime. Well, that was interesting. Just 1 month later, the feds did just that. 1 month later, they announced what's called QE2. They call it quantitative easing. It's a way of absorbing debt. Now, how do they absorb debt? They didn't devaluate the dollar because they couldn't do that around the world because the rest of the world wasn't going to stand for it. So what did they do? They created a new program to create $600 million. How did they create it? Well, they go and they print it. They just print it up to go buy the debt that the government can't pay for. So they went through a devaluation of the dollar through a buyback program of debt. And they're going to spend so much money per month up until the summer till they reach $600 million. Now, that's not going to be enough. You'll be coming back and you'll be surprised if you don't see it rise to over $1 trillion. Because that's the very minimum they need just to get by right now. Most believe that this is just the beginning. And so with all that debt, what's keeping America afloat? I mean, if you owe so much money and you only got so much coming in, your debt, your people you owe money to, they reach the point and say, hey, look, pay up now or I'm coming to take it away. Right? Or they shut you down. We keep raising our debt and printing money. That's the only thing that's keeping the United States afloat right now. It's that simple. Raising our debt and printing money. Because we're not producing enough to keep us afloat. The United States quit being a producing country many years ago. We are a consuming nation. We consume everything and create debt. We don't produce enough to get us out to benefit this nation. The dollar right now is the standard and the world's currency. Now, Timothy Geithner said, would the dollar cease to be the currency, the world standard? And he said, not in our lifetime. I'm going to show you a video in just a second. Let me just give you one example for oil and see how things are going to change our lives. Right now, the primary receiver of oil is paid for in dollars. So if we need to buy oil or we need to pay for debt, we simply go to the back room, we print some more dollars, and we go out and say, okay, give us some more oil. Germany can't do that. Europe can't do that. What they have to do is this. They have to take their currency trade it to US dollars, and then go buy oil. Now, that's the primary way that things are being accepted. Now, I know they go through banks, and they go through the foreign exchange and the central banks, and I know it's a complicated way. But the bottom line, when it finally comes down to paying it off, is based on the US dollar. Now, the US dollar, if we don't have enough, and it starts using other currencies, and we can't buy the oil, immediately the price of oil rises. We can't afford to buy it, so we have to go print more money. So if, let's say we have $10 and we need 20. So we go print $10, now we got 20, right? It still buys half the oil. It only gets half because the dollars have got more dollars, but its value doesn't change. The value stays the same. Your dollar's only worth so much money. I don't care how many you give me. If you print more, you're still going to get the same for the amount of value of the dollar. So if you print twice as much, the value is 1/2. So you see, it doesn't help. As long as the dollar values the oil against the dollar, they accept that as the currency standard when it doesn't change. So then what happens if they change it? Well, our standard of living now changes because everything just went up. And you're seeing it right now in commodities. Cotton has risen 100% this past year, and most of it has been in the last 4 months. When? Since we began QE2. Because you can't keep printing money because the value drops and it doesn't have the same worth. Soybeans have been going up. And so you're going to begin to see a cost of everything escalating because we keep printing the dollar but trying to absorb the debt. America in default. In 2010, the debt ceiling was raised from $2.7 trillion to $14.3 trillion. We're just under $14 trillion right now. In less than 2 or 3 months, we will be at that ceiling. The new Congress coming in, they're going to have to face a couple of issues. U.S. debt now just $400 billion under the ceiling of $14.3 trillion. We will reach that in just a few months, our ceiling. The Congress will be forced to raise that limit or shut down the government. How do they raise the limit? Well, they just go print more money. They'll say, okay, now, our limit was 14.3, now let's go to 16 trillion. Now, they just raised that ceiling last year, and they're going to have to raise it again. What does that mean? Things are going to begin to happen this year. One, they're going to be forced to raise the debt ceiling. Now, I don't care what they tell you, they're going to have to raise the debt ceiling because they can't stop it. They cannot stop the interest rate on the debt from rising. We can't produce enough goods. I'm going to tell you a fact. If we took 100% of everyone's salary in the United States, 100%, we can't pay for the budget for 1 year. You can't pay for it. That's a fact. Those are real figures. Now, if we paid for the budget alone, we're $1.3 trillion over budget. So we've got to come up with everything they're spending plus $1.3 trillion plus the interest on this debt that rises about $120 million every hour. $120 million is the minimum every hour that interest is raised. That's incredible. So they're going to have to be forced to raise the ceiling. No matter what they tell you, they'll have to find a compromise to raise it. Because they're going in and saying, we're not raising the debt. They can't stop it. They'll be forced to begin cutbacks to the welfare recipients. So that means as the debt continues to rise and they fight what they're going to do, they're going to have a compromise. The compromises will begin cutting back. You might begin to see them raid Social Security again. You might begin to see them cut back Medicare, Medicaid. And they will begin to find ways to cut back as they continue to raise the debt. Because all the cutbacks cannot stop the debt rise. We need to get that on our head. That's a reality. Don't let it be a normalcy bias that you ever forget. They can't create enough money to stop the debt. The rest of the world knows it, and they're separating themselves from us. The devalued dollar is the one world currency. On March 24th, 2009, this is a year ago. You haven't heard much about it in 2010, but it's still on the books. Reuters reported that President Barack Obama, on his 2 economic officials on Tuesday, dismissed suggestions by the emerging economic powers that the world move away from the U.S. dollar as the world's main currency. He denied that that's what's going on. He says,